Brilliant or just plain bizarre? From ultra-luxurious masterpieces to unbelievably dumb designs, these 12 cars will leave you speechless. You have never seen anything like this. Buckle up as we take a wild ride through 12 of the most ridiculous, extravagant, or downright dumb cars ever made. When I first laid eyes on that 1978 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz with the massive 8.2L V8, I knew I had to have it. The moment I saw that gleaming oversized body with its trademark vinyl roof and Biarritz badging, I could already imagine myself behind the wheel, gliding through the streets in a car that screamed luxury, style, and prestige. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was the embodiment of everything Cadillac stood for at that time, an iconic symbol of American opulence. Little did I know, this car, while undeniably magnificent in its appearance, was going to be a lot more than I bargained for. When I finally got behind the wheel, I immediately sank into those plush, pillowy seats. I don't think I've ever sat in anything quite like it before, or since. It felt like being cradled, like the car was designed not just for driving, but for living in, for escaping the world outside. The seats seemed almost overstuffed, like a luxury lounge that wrapped itself around you. Every surface was covered in soft leather, every inch crafted with the kind of attention to detail you'd expect from something meant to give you the finest experience imaginable. The sheer indulgence of the interior was beyond anything I'd ever felt. From the tufted upholstery to the smooth wood trim, it felt more like stepping into a private jet than a car. The opera lights inside were a nice touch, just the flick of a switch, and it felt like you were in some kind of glamorous old-school movie. And then, of course, there was the engine, the legendary 8.2L V8, the heart of this enormous machine. In theory, this engine should have been a beast. It had all the right ingredients, an immense size, all that raw American muscle under the hood. But when I fired it up, I was greeted by the sound of something more subdued than I'd expected. You see, despite its monstrous size, the engine was strangled by emissions regulations, leaving it with barely 200 horsepower. At first, I thought there was something wrong with it. Surely with that much engine, I should have felt like I was driving a rocket, but instead, it felt like I was piloting a massive boat across the road, trying to get out of its own way. And truth be told, it didn't take long for the novelty to wear off. The performance? Well, to put it bluntly, it was lacking. This was a car that, despite its imposing presence and huge V8, was slower than you'd expect. It felt more like it was lumbering along than speeding down the road. It wasn't for want of power, mind you. That engine could have been a king on the streets. But the smothering emissions rules and the sheer weight of the car meant it just couldn't deliver the punch I was hoping for. It was like trying to race a mansion. It might look impressive, but it wasn't built for speed. But here's the thing, despite all of that, despite the fact that I felt like I was trying to push a grand piano uphill every time I pressed the pedal, it didn't matter. The Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz wasn't about performance. It wasn't meant to be a high-speed chaser or a nimble corner carver. It was built to make a statement, to make sure that when you were behind the wheel, everyone knew you were somebody. And let me tell you, nobody missed this car. It was impossible to ignore. It was like a rolling monument to excess and indulgence, and people couldn't help but look. The sheer size of it, the long, sweeping hood, the massive front end, and that stunning vinyl roof demanded attention. When you drove it, you didn't just travel from point A to point B, you arrived. Every time I pulled into a parking lot or cruised down the boulevard, I could feel the eyes on me. It was the kind of car that made you the center of attention, whether you wanted it or not. And in that moment, you knew you were driving something special, something that stood out not because of speed or agility, but because of what it represented. Luxury, style, and a certain kind of confidence that comes only when you know you've made it. People didn't just look at the car, they looked at you. And they saw someone who had made a choice, someone who wasn't afraid to embrace excess and enjoy the finer things in life. Was it practical? Not really. Was it fast? Definitely not. But did it provide an experience unlike any other? Absolutely. The 1978 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz was the epitome of a car designed not for the everyday driver, but for the man or woman who wanted something more. It wasn't just a car, it was a lifestyle, a way of telling the world that you'd arrived. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but then again, perfection is overrated. What it offered was something far more important, an experience. And for that, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It didn't matter that it felt like you were driving through molasses in a car that could have doubled as a mobile mansion. What mattered was that every time I drove that car, I felt like the king of the road. It wasn't about how fast it could go. The 1989 Infiniti Q45a is a prime example of automotive ambition gone awry. An expensive gamble that, on paper, sounded innovative, but in practice turned into a high-maintenance headache. Infiniti, fresh on the scene, wanted to make a statement in the luxury sedan market, and their approach was bold. Bring in Formula One-inspired technology, specifically hydraulic active suspension, to provide a luxury experience that was supposed to redefine comfort and handling. Instead, they managed to deliver a car that was an engineering marvel in some respects, but a nightmare to maintain in others. Why, it's stupid. Infiniti thought they could redefine the luxury sedan segment by adding active suspension technology inspired by Formula One racing to a road-going vehicle. In theory, it was a game changer. The idea was that the car's suspension could adjust to road conditions in real time, offering an incredibly smooth ride and exceptional handling by adjusting ride height and damping based on driving conditions. The goal was to create a sedan that could provide the athleticism of a sports car without sacrificing luxury. Sounds great, right? Well, the reality was far different. This technology, which involved a complex system of hydraulic pumps and valves to adjust the suspension, was not only expensive to maintain, it was also incredibly prone to failure. Hydraulic suspension systems are notoriously finicky, and over time the seals would wear out, leading to leaks. And when those leaks happened, the car could quickly drop in height, effectively transforming your luxury sedan into a lowrider overnight. Imagine paying top dollar for a sleek, futuristic car, only to watch it sag into an embarrassing, bouncing lowrider as the suspension system failed. The cost of repairs for this system was astronomical, and many owners were left with the choice of either dealing with the continuous, expensive maintenance or letting the car slowly degrade into a mechanical mess. It was a classic case of a manufacturer overestimating consumer desire for high-tech suspension and underestimating the reliability and cost concerns that would come with it. While active suspension worked in the short term, the long-term financial burden was a deal-breaker for many. A luxury sedan should offer comfort and refinement, not the looming threat of constant repairs. Luxury factor. Despite its mechanical failings, the Infiniti Q45a was a car that exuded luxury in many ways. Powered by a 278 horsepower V8 engine, it delivered solid performance for its time. It wasn't the fastest sedan in its class, but it had more than enough muscle to make sure you were never left wanting when it came to acceleration or highway cruising. It wasn't about raw power, it was about having enough to move gracefully, and the V8 did just that, combining both refinement and strength in a smooth, quiet package. One of the most interesting design choices was the lack of a front grille. Infiniti wanted to create a clean, modern look, so they omitted the traditional grille that most luxury sedans sported. While this design choice was ahead of its time and gave the Q45a a futuristic, sleek appearance, it also left the car looking a bit too minimalist in hindsight. Some people loved the look, while others found it a bit too stark, as though the car was missing an important design element. Still, it was a bold statement of design philosophy, and in a market that was increasingly focused on aesthetics as much as performance. The Q45a definitely stood out. Inside, the Q45a was outfitted with some of the finest leather available at the time, a hallmark of luxury. The materials felt sumptuous to the touch, and the attention to detail in the interior design gave it a refined, upscale atmosphere. It wasn't just about the tech or the performance. Infiniti wanted to make sure every aspect of the car felt premium. The leather was soft, the wood trim was expertly applied, and the overall interior was designed to make you feel like you were stepping into a high-end suite, not just a car. In the end, the 1989 Infiniti Q45a remains a car caught between innovation and practicality. It was one of the first true challengers to the established European luxury sedans, but its reliance on complex, unreliable technology and the astronomical repair costs it incurred made it a difficult sell in the long run. For those who loved it and could afford to maintain it, the Q45a was an impressive statement of luxury and performance. For others, it was a beautiful, expensive mistake. It looked futuristic. It drove like a dream, until the hydraulics started leaking, and then it was a whole different story. The 1974 Stutz Blackhawk is the epitome of excess, a car designed not for practicality, but to make a statement, and what a statement it made. With its gold-plated trim, handcrafted Italian body, and an interior decked out in mink carpeting, the Blackhawk was the kind of car that screamed luxury, opulence, and celebrity, whether it had the substance to back it up or not. Why it's stupid? Let's be honest here. The Stutz Blackhawk's reputation was built on its associations with larger-than-life figures like Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. These legendary figures were known for their extravagant tastes, and when they drove the Blackhawk, it was less about the car's engineering or quality and more about flaunting wealth and style. Underneath all the gold trim and extravagant design elements, however, the Stutz Blackhawk was, for all intents and purposes, a reworked Pontiac Grand Prix. That's right, this high-priced, star-studded luxury car had the mechanical backbone of a relatively mundane Pontiac. A few changes to the body and the interior were made, and voila. Now you've got a car worth a small fortune, but not one that really had anything to justify that price. The Blackhawk's $40,000 price tag in 1974, equivalent to over $250,000 today, was a tough pill to swallow for a car that, underneath, was essentially a dressed-up Pontiac. The build quality might have been more luxurious, but it didn't have the technical refinement or innovation of other high-end competitors of the time. Instead of being a truly bespoke luxury automobile, it was more of a showpiece designed to grab attention rather than provide outstanding performance or engineering. Not only was the Blackhawk absurdly overpriced, but the over-the-top decorations, 24-karat gold trim, gold-plated emblems, and excessive wood trim made it look like the kind of car you'd see parked outside a Las Vegas casino or in the driveway of a celebrity who wanted to broadcast their wealth. It wasn't a car built for driving pleasure or innovation. It was a rolling status symbol, and a very expensive one at that. If you wanted to be seen as the epitome of 1970s luxury, the Stutz Blackhawk was your ticket to doing so, but at a significant cost, both financially and in terms of its true value as a car. Luxury factor. Now, when it came to luxury, the Stutz Blackhawk certainly delivered, though in a way that might make you question your taste. The body was handmade in Italy, an important nod to craftsmanship, though it was essentially just an aesthetic upgrade over its Pontiac origins. The attention to detail was apparent, with every inch of the car's exterior and interior dressed up to look as extravagant as possible. Inside, the Blackhawk was a true masterpiece in the most extravagant sense. The most notable feature? The mink carpet. Yes, you read that right, mink carpet. If you were lucky enough to sit inside this luxury car, you were stepping on the fur of mink, a symbol of excess that was perhaps even more outlandish than the gold trim on the outside. It was one of those details that gave the Blackhawk a bizarre air of ridiculous luxury, as if the car was trying too hard to be the embodiment of wealth. Gold-plated seatbelt buckles? Check. Plush leather upholstery? Check. Everything about the interior felt like it was designed to over-deliver on luxury, but in a way that some people might have found just a little too much. The engine, which was just a typical V8, was sufficient for the job, but it wasn't anything special. It did what was necessary to move the car, but didn't exactly provide the kind of performance one might expect from a car with such an ostentatious price tag. There was nothing particularly sporty or innovative under the hood. Just a reliable but unremarkable American engine. But honestly, performance wasn't the Blackhawk's strong suit. It wasn't about how fast it could go or how well it handled corners. It was about how it made you feel when you were behind the wheel, or more likely, when people saw you behind the wheel. In the end, the 1974 Stutz Blackhawk was the quintessential flaunt-it car designed for those who wanted the world to know that they had arrived. It wasn't about practicality or performance. It was all about the image. And while it was undoubtedly a luxurious and eye-catching car, it was hard to ignore the fact that when you peeled back the layers of gold and mink, it was still just a Pontiac Grand Prix wearing a very expensive costume. The 1958 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham was a true marvel of its time, a car built with every possible luxury feature a wealthy buyer could desire, except perhaps for some common sense. Cadillac threw everything they had at this model, and while it undoubtedly pushed the envelope in terms of luxury and innovation, it also had its absurdities that make it one of the most extravagant and occasionally ridiculous cars ever built. Why it's stupid. Let's start with the most head-scratching element of the 1958 Eldorado Brougham, the built-in bar. Yes, this luxury sedan came with a PIN as a standard feature. Now, while the thought of sipping a cocktail from the comfort of your plush leather seat might sound appealing to some, the idea that a car would come equipped with a bar in the late 50s, when drinking and driving was, at best, a questionable practice, strikes us as utterly ridiculous today. Imagine a time when the notion of indulging in a drink while driving wasn't only commonplace, but actually encouraged by the inclusion of a literal bar in your car. The Brougham wasn't just about luxury, it was about flaunting excess in the most blatant way possible. And the cost of all this opulence? Cadillac lost money on every single unit sold. The Brougham was priced so high that it was an economic disaster for the company. At a time when most cars were far more affordable, the Eldorado Brougham came with a price tag that made it more expensive than many homes, and Cadillac couldn't even recoup the costs of manufacturing the car. The idea of a car that cost more to produce than it was sold for might sound insane today, but back then, Cadillac was betting on sheer luxury and status to carry the day. The car might have been a success in terms of image, but in terms of profit, it was a monumental failure. Luxury factor. Despite the absurdity of its built-in bar, there's no denying that the 1958 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham was a masterpiece of luxury. Cadillac went all in on features that were designed to create the ultimate in comfort, refinement, and style. And they succeeded, at least in the short term. One of the standout features was the stainless steel roof. This was a bold move, adding a striking visual element to the car while also making it incredibly durable and resistant to weathering. It was a design decision that made the Brougham look distinctively futuristic, yet it also gave it an air of sophistication and exclusivity. The steel roof wasn't just a practical choice, it was a statement of opulence and innovation. Then there were the suicide doors, which added a dramatic flair to the design and made for an even more luxurious experience when entering or exiting the car. These rear hinge doors made it easier for passengers to slip in and out of the car, while also adding to the grandeur of the experience. It felt like stepping into a vehicle reserved for royalty, or at least for those who could afford to look and feel like royalty. As if that weren't enough, Cadillac even threw in a magnetic perfume dispenser. Yes, a perfume dispenser. This little feature was meant to ensure that your car always smelled fresh and fragrant, no matter how long you'd been cruising. It's hard not to laugh at the sheer extravagance of this feature, especially when you consider that it was just one of many things designed to push the envelope of what a luxury car could offer. Perfume wasn't the only aromatic detail either. Every aspect of the car's interior was meticulously crafted with the finest materials. Plush carpeting, soft leather seats, rich wood trim, all contributing to a cabin experience that was as close to living in a palace as you could get. The Brougham also came equipped with air suspension, power everything, windows, seats, steering, brakes, and even an automatic leveling system. It was a car designed to coddle its passengers with every comfort imaginable, making it one of the most advanced and luxurious vehicles of its time. The sheer amount of tech, luxury, and thought that went into the Brougham was staggering, and it's part of the reason why Cadillac was willing to take a financial hit. In an era where cars were still relatively simple, the Brougham was a glimpse into the future of automotive luxury, offering technology and amenities that felt downright sci-fi. In the end, the 1958 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham was a car that was just too much. Too much luxury, too much excess, and in some cases, too much absurdity. While it was undoubtedly a car that commanded attention and represented the height of American opulence, it's hard not to chuckle at the sheer absurdity of features like a built-in bar and a perfume dispenser. But at the same time, there's no denying that the Brougham was an automotive icon, one that still holds a special place in the hearts of car enthusiasts today, even if it did come at a heavy financial cost to Cadillac. The 1980 Aston Martin Lagonda is one of those cars that was ahead of its time in a way that makes you scratch your head and wonder if it was actually meant to be a practical vehicle. Aston Martin, known for its luxury sports cars and refined British engineering, decided to take a bold step in the 1980s and create a luxury sedan that was nothing like what anyone had ever seen before. The result was the Lagonda, an angular, wedge-shaped, computerized behemoth that looked like it had rolled straight out of a futuristic sci-fi movie. While it was undoubtedly a striking design and loaded with tech, the car's notorious reliability issues make it more of a cautionary tale than a shining example of automotive innovation. Why it's stupid? Let's start with the design. The 1980 Lagonda looked like something from the year 2020, or maybe even 2120. With its sharp lines, aggressive wedge shape, and futuristic stance, it was the kind of car that immediately drew attention. It certainly stood out in a sea of more traditionally styled sedans, but the issue was that, while it looked cutting edge, the technology inside wasn't nearly as reliable as its space-age aesthetics promised. The Lagonda was equipped with a highly ambitious digital dashboard that included LED screens and touch controls, which, for the time, seemed like an incredible leap into the future. The problem? The tech barely worked. The digital dashboard, which looked like something NASA would use to land a rocket, had a tendency to fail more often than it worked. Owners spent more time fiddling with malfunctioning screens and trying to get the touch-sensitive buttons to respond than actually driving the car. The car was essentially a tech experiment on wheels, but one that came with all the issues you'd expect from an early adopter of unproven technology. If you've ever tried to use an early touchscreen device that constantly misreads your touch, you can imagine how frustrating the experience was behind the wheel of a Lagonda. Furthermore, the Lagonda was infamous for its reliability issues, partly due to its advanced technology, but also because of poor build quality and the fact that Aston Martin was a relatively small company with limited resources. Owners often found themselves dealing with constant repairs, leading to the uncomfortable realization that they were spending far more time fixing their car than driving it. For a car that cost well over $100,000 in the early 1980s, which would be equivalent to nearly $500,000 today, the amount of time spent in the repair shop was just unacceptable. If you were the proud owner of a Lagonda, you were likely spending just as much time at the mechanic as you were on the road. Luxury factor. Despite the technological failures, the Aston Martin Lagonda was, without a doubt, a luxurious vehicle in terms of its interior appointments. The leather-trimmed seats and dashboard were crafted with the kind of quality that you would expect from a high-end British luxury car. The seats themselves were incredibly comfortable, upholstered in fine leather that enveloped you as you sat behind the wheel. The interior had a minimalist yet elegant aesthetic with a focus on comfort and refinement. It was everything you would expect from a car that was designed to compete with the finest sedans in the world. And then there were the pop-up headlights, a feature that screamed 1980s cool. Pop-up headlights were the automotive equivalent of a car's wow factor back in the day, and the Lagonda, with its angular styling, was no exception. When you flipped on the lights, the headlights would spring to life, further adding to the car's futuristic image. It was like watching a sci-fi spaceship come to life on the road. In a time when most cars had traditional, static headlights, the pop-up feature was as visually striking as it was functional. The LED dashboard, while notoriously unreliable, also looked incredible, if you could get it to work. With its array of digital readouts, the dashboard looked like something that belonged in a spaceship or a high-tech control center. It gave the car a distinctly modern, tech-forward feel, and for a brief moment, you could imagine yourself in the future of motoring. Unfortunately, the reality of the Lagonda's tech was far from what you'd hoped for, and its constant malfunctions rendered the futuristic dashboard more of a liability than a luxury feature. In the end, the 1980 Aston Martin Lagonda was a car that tried to be something more than a traditional luxury sedan. It was a showcase for early automotive tech that was undeniably ambitious, but ultimately flawed. While it had the right ingredients for success, a stunning design, luxurious interior, and cutting-edge technology, the execution left much to be desired. Instead of being the pinnacle of innovation and luxury, it became more of a headache for its owners. The 1996 Vector M12 is one of those cars that feels like an ambitious, high-performance dream gone terribly wrong. A supercar that was intended to rival the likes of Lamborghini and Ferrari, the Vector M12 took bold inspiration from the Lamborghini Diablo, but managed to miss the mark in almost every conceivable way. Despite its bold, exotic exterior and lofty performance claims, the M12 ultimately became a cautionary tale in how not to design a supercar. Why it's stupid. Imagine you're the kind of person who has the money to buy a Lamborghini Diablo, one of the most iconic supercars of the 90s, and instead, you opt for the Vector M12. On paper, it was a performance car that should have been able to match the Lamborghini, if not exceed it. But in reality, it was like buying the Lamborghini's lesser, less refined, and far more flawed cousin. First, the interior was a disaster, where the Diablo had an interior that, while simple, was sleek and purpose-built for performance. The Vector M12 was a hodgepodge of awkward design choices. The layout was confusing, the materials felt cheap compared to what you'd expect from a supercar, and the ergonomics were downright uncomfortable. It had the kind of interior that made you feel like you were driving a prototype, not a finished production car. The use of suede everywhere made it feel like the car was more suited for a lounge than the track, with little regard for practicality or long-term comfort. And let's not forget the airplane-inspired cockpit design, which, while potentially cool to some, ended up feeling more like you were piloting a jet than driving a car. A strange choice for a road-going supercar, making the driving experience feel unnecessarily complex and disorienting. But the real kicker was the heavy Americanized body. The Vector M12, despite its exotic looks, was built on a chassis designed for American muscle, and it showed. The body, while visually impressive in a sci-fi way, was far heavier than it needed to be, affecting the car's handling and performance. It had none of the light, agile feel that you'd expect from a European supercar. Instead, it felt sluggish, more like an oversized American muscle car than the cutting-edge sports car it aspired to be. The design seemed to borrow from the best aspects of European cars, but was weighed down by American engineering quirks that didn't belong in a supercar of this caliber. Then there was the reliability issue. Despite the promise of top-tier engineering, the Vector M12 had some of the worst reliability on the market, even by supercar standards. It was finicky, prone to mechanical failures, and offered the kind of reliability you'd expect from an old British sports car, not a car from a manufacturer with aspirations of competing with the best in the world. Owners who forked out over $200,000 for the M12 often found themselves spending more time in the shop than behind the wheel. Luxury factor. The M12 was technically a supercar, but the luxury experience it offered didn't live up to that label. While the car did have its share of high-end features, like suede upholstery and a cockpit design inspired by aviation, the overall feeling was one of missed potential. The interior was like a weird mashup of luxury and sci-fi fantasy, but it never fully came together in a way that felt refined. The suede-covered seats were plush, but also somewhat impractical for a car that was meant to be driven hard. The airplane-like cockpit was futuristic, sure enough, but it also added to the feeling that you weren't really driving a car. You were simply occupying a strange space that didn't quite know whether it was meant for performance or luxury. And while the car's performance numbers were respectable, the experience of driving the Vector M12 didn't live up to the expectations of a supercar. It lacked the precision and visceral thrill that you get from something like a Lamborghini or Ferrari. Instead of feeling like a finely tuned machine, The M12 felt more like a loud, flashy, unpolished car that couldn't quite decide whether it wanted to be a high-performance track car or an exotic cruiser. It was a car that screamed, "Look at me," more than it whispered, "Let's go for a drive." In summary, the 1996 Vector M12 was a supercar that, in theory, had all the right ingredients: an exotic, attention-grabbing design, cutting-edge technology, and a powerful engine. But the execution was flawed, with a poor interior, a heavy body, and reliability issues that made it more of a headache than a thrill to own. It was like buying a Lamborghini Diablo, only to find out that it had none of the refinement, performance, or pedigree of its Italian counterpart. The M12 ended up being a flashy disappointment that looked the part but failed to deliver the driving experience and luxury it promised, leaving it as one of the more baffling supercars of the 90s. The 1957 Dual-Ghia is a car that's as extravagant as it is impractical, a beautiful example of mid-century automotive excess that, in many ways, should never have worked, but did, at least on the surface. Created in the late 1950s, the Dual-Ghia was a car meant to blend European flair with American muscle, and while it turned heads with its striking design and luxurious appointments, it quickly became one of the most frustratingly difficult cars to own, even for the ultra-rich. Why it's stupid? The 1957 Dual-Ghia was an oddball from the moment it hit the streets. At its core, it was an Italian-built car, crafted by the famed Ghia design house, known for their stylish bodies and the kind of European finesse you'd expect from a luxury automaker. The body was elegant, sleek, and effortlessly glamorous, with lines that gave it a jet-set allure. But under the hood, things took a turn for the odd. The car was powered by an American Dodge Hemi engine, an engine that, while powerful, was out of place in a luxury car that was supposed to feel European through and through. While the combination of an Italian body and an American engine might sound like a fun fusion of worlds, it created an immediate logistical nightmare. The American Hemi engine didn't mesh well with the Italian design and production process, making repairs and maintenance a complex affair. And when it came time to get parts, owners were often out of luck. With such a limited production run, just 117 cars were made between 1956 and 1958. Getting spare parts was nearly impossible. Even the wealthiest buyers, who could afford the car's hefty price tag, around $7,500 in 1957, which is equivalent to over $60,000 today, often found themselves waiting months for repairs. A car that costs so much to buy and maintain should have at least been reliable and easy to service. But the Dual-Ghia was anything but. The fusion of Italian design and American engineering only made it more difficult to keep on the road, leaving its owners to wonder why they hadn't just opted for something more practical. Luxury factor. Despite its impracticalities, there's no denying that the 1957 Dual-Ghia exuded luxury in ways that few cars could at the time. The body was a masterpiece of mid-century Italian design, with curves and details that looked like they had been plucked from the pages of a high-fashion magazine. The styling alone made it one of the most stylish cars of its era, a true symbol of wealth and class. But it wasn't just about how it looked, it was about the experience of being in the car. Inside, the luxury was apparent in every stitch. The hand-stitched leather seats and plush interior were a testament to the craftsmanship that went into each car. The leather, which was meticulously chosen for its quality and feel, gave the cabin an air of sophistication that matched its exterior design. Every detail, from the dashboard to the door panels, felt like it had been carefully considered and expertly crafted to ensure that those fortunate enough to sit in the car would experience the height of mid-century luxury. And then there was the yacht-style interior. If you've ever been on a luxury yacht, you know that there's a distinct vibe that blends opulence with nautical charm. The Dual-Ghia's interior was designed to evoke that same sense of indulgence. From the wood inlays to the elegant curves of the seats, the car had an unmistakable nautical influence, making it feel like you were sitting in the lap of luxury while cruising down the road. It was a feature that set the car apart from others in its class, lending it an air of exclusivity and refinement. This yacht-like interior, with its indulgent finishes and luxurious materials, made the Dual-Ghia feel like the automotive equivalent of a private yacht. The car was also equipped with white wall tires, which, at the time, were the epitome of style and class. These tires gave the car a polished, vintage look, further cementing its status as a high-end automobile for the rich and famous. They were a nod to the past, but were still seen as the height of automotive luxury in the late 50s. In summary, the 1957 Dual-Ghia was a car that combined style and luxury with some serious practical flaws. Its Italian-American hybrid nature led to a frustrating ownership experience, where the lavish design and luxurious features were overshadowed by repair delays and mechanical issues. But for those who could afford it, and for those who were willing to wait months for parts, the Dual-Ghia was the epitome of exclusivity, a rare gem that stood out on the road for its sheer elegance and refined luxury. The combination of hand-stitched leather, a yacht-inspired interior, and white wall tires made it a car that you could imagine cruising along the coast with the rich and famous. But in the end, the only thing more elusive than its looks was its reliability. The 1976 Rolls-Royce Camargue is one of those rare missteps in the world of ultra-luxury cars. A car that should have represented the height of refinement and elegance, but instead became a symbol of how not to blend tradition with modern design. Rolls-Royce, a brand synonymous with opulence, sophistication, and impeccable craftsmanship, took a risk by stepping outside their comfort zone with the Camargue. They decided to create a luxury coupe designed by the famed Italian design house, Pininfarina. However, the result was a vehicle that, despite its top-tier price tag, was a bloated, awkward mess that left many wondering what went wrong. Why it's stupid. The Camargue was introduced in 1976 as a two-door coupe designed to push the boundaries of luxury. However, it was not a refined evolution of the Rolls-Royce brand. It was more of an oddity. The car came with a price tag that was double that of the well-respected Silver Shadow, which was already an expensive vehicle by any standard. This hefty price hike, in theory, should have justified an even more opulent and groundbreaking car, but instead, Rolls-Royce essentially took the Silver Shadow and slapped a Pininfarina body on it. The end result was a vehicle that looked like a muddled compromise between the tradition of Rolls-Royce's stately sedans and the Italian flair for sleek design. The Italian influence on the Camargue's design was evident in the car's sharp, angular lines and bold proportions. While Pininfarina was known for creating some of the most beautiful cars in the world, think Ferrari and Maserati, the Camargue's design didn't quite live up to the reputation. Instead of embodying the timeless elegance that Rolls-Royce was known for, the Camargue's design looked more like an awkward attempt at modernity, an attempt that didn't quite capture the essence of either British luxury or Italian styling. The car had a bloated, boxy look, which, when combined with its overly large proportions, made it appear clumsy and out of place in the world of luxury cars. It wasn't just the design that made the Camargue a misstep. It was also the fact that the car's price tag felt like a cruel joke. At twice the price of the Silver Shadow, you would expect not only a better design, but also cutting-edge technology and performance. Instead, the Camargue came with many of the same mechanical systems found in the Silver Shadow, which by that point was beginning to feel outdated compared to newer, more innovative vehicles in the luxury market. The car's performance was not significantly improved, and while the interior was undoubtedly plush and comfortable, it didn't justify the astronomical cost. It was as if Rolls-Royce had taken a tried-and-true design and overcharged for a new skin, offering little more in return. Luxury factor. Despite its design flaws, the Camargue did retain many of the hallmarks of Rolls-Royce luxury. Inside, it was the epitome of comfort and refinement. The plush leather seats, wood veneers, and high-end materials were all present, making it feel like a true Rolls-Royce in terms of quality. The craftsmanship was second to none, and the ride quality, as you would expect from a Rolls, was smooth and serene. For those who wanted a true luxury experience, the interior delivered, with every detail carefully crafted to provide the utmost comfort. But luxury isn't just about materials, it's also about the overall experience. And that's where the Camargue faltered. The exterior design, as mentioned earlier, made it appear overly bloated and less refined. While it may have been luxurious, the design made it hard to take seriously as a true sports coupe, especially when you compare it to other offerings in the luxury coupe market. Even a Lincoln Continental, a car that was far less expensive, looked more poised and athletic next to the Camargue. The Rolls-Royce Camargue was also equipped with some of the best features for its time, such as air conditioning, automatic transmission, power windows, and a top-tier audio system. But again, these were features you'd expect in any Rolls-Royce, not something that should justify doubling the price of the Silver Shadow. In a way, the Camargue represented everything Rolls-Royce was: top-tier materials, craftsmanship, and luxury. But it also showed a moment of hubris where the company tried too hard to innovate and, in the process, created something that didn't quite fit the brand's core identity. In summary, the 1976 Rolls-Royce Camargue was a car that tried to take the Rolls-Royce brand into new, bold directions, but ended up feeling more like a misfire than a success. The price was sky high for what was essentially a reskinned Silver Shadow, and the design, despite being Italian-influenced, never quite captured the timeless elegance that Rolls-Royce was known for. Though it was luxurious and impeccably crafted, the Camargue felt bloated and overpriced, leaving it as a footnote in Rolls-Royce. The 1991 Chrysler TC by Maserati is one of those cars that perfectly encapsulates the strange, misguided ventures that automakers sometimes take, where the result is a bizarre mix of expectations and reality. In theory, teaming up two iconic names like Chrysler and Maserati should have created something exciting and unique, a luxury roadster that blended American practicality with Italian flair. But in practice, it turned out to be a bizarrely unremarkable car that left everyone scratching their heads. Why it's stupid. When Chrysler and Maserati came together in the late 80s, the result was the Chrysler TC by Maserati, a luxury roadster that was supposed to deliver high-end performance and style. Instead, what they delivered was essentially a Dodge Daytona, yes, a regular run-of-the-mill American coupe, dressed up with some Italian leather and a Maserati badge for good measure. The problem was that the Daytona, though competent in its own right, wasn't exactly the foundation for a world-class roadster. The decision to rebadge and modify a car that was, at best, considered average by enthusiasts didn't do the Chrysler TC any favors. What Chrysler and Maserati were hoping for was a kind of European-inspired luxury roadster that would compete with the likes of the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL or the BMW Z3. But what they ended up with was a car that felt more like a half-hearted experiment. The car wasn't a true Maserati, despite the name and the badge. It was a Dodge Daytona dressed up in hand-stitched leather and given a turbocharged engine that, honestly, wasn't very fast. The 2.2-liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine was supposed to give the car some performance chops, but in reality, it was slower than most family minivans of the time. In fact, its turbocharged engine produced just 150 horsepower, barely enough to make you feel like you were driving a true performance car. The TC by Maserati, despite its Italian pedigree, wasn't much more than a glorified Dodge with a higher price tag and a whole lot of unnecessary flair. The project was so ill-conceived and poorly received that Chrysler ended up practically giving them away, with many cars being sold at massive discounts to clear out inventory. As a result, the Chrysler TC by Maserati became a symbol of failure rather than a roadster people aspired to own. Luxury factor. Despite its many flaws, the Chrysler TC by Maserati did try to offer some semblance of luxury. Inside, you got hand-stitched leather upholstery that was certainly better than what you'd find in a typical Chrysler product at the time. The interior had a decidedly upscale feel, with wood paneling and leather accents meant to give it that European roadster vibe. But while the materials were high quality, the design of the interior never quite matched the elegance or sophistication that you would expect from a Maserati-branded car. The Maserati badge, while iconic in its own right, didn't hold much weight here. It was more of a marketing gimmick than an indicator of true luxury or performance. While Maserati is known for building some of the finest sports cars in the world, the TC was far removed from anything close to that. The badge didn't mean much when the car underneath it was essentially a rebadged Dodge that lacked any of the finesse you'd expect from a luxury sports car. And then there was the turbocharged engine. While turbocharging was becoming more common in performance cars at the time, the TC's engine didn't deliver the kind of speed or thrills you'd expect from a roadster wearing the Maserati name. It was more about cruising comfortably than carving up twisty roads. Unfortunately, its performance capabilities were underwhelming, making it feel more like a roadster for people who wanted to look stylish at low speeds rather than push the car's limits. Despite all of this, the car's design was at least a step up from the basic Dodge Daytona. The exterior, with its sleek flowing lines, looked more like a proper roadster than many of the other Chrysler offerings of the time. But it still wasn't enough to make it stand out in a crowded market full of better built, better performing, and better designed cars. In summary, the 1991 Chrysler TC by Maserati was a car that tried too hard to be something it wasn't. The collaboration between Chrysler and Maserati should have resulted in something exciting, but instead it was a mismatch of design, performance, and expectations. The car's luxury features like hand-stitched leather and wood accents were nice, but they couldn't mask the fact that it was essentially a dressed-up Dodge Daytona with a turbo engine that couldn't live up to its promises. It's a car that failed to deliver on the performance and prestige that its name suggested, and it remains an odd footnote in automotive history, a reminder of how brand names alone can't always make up for poor execution. The 1989 Mercedes-Benz 560 SEC AMG widebody is one of those cars that stands as a paradox, a high-performance, high-dollar luxury coupe that, in some ways, tried to push the boundaries of what an elite automobile could be, but in other ways completely missed the mark. It's the kind of car that gets people excited with its rarity, hand-built engine, and wide-body design, only to leave them scratching their heads when they realize it still doesn't quite live up to its price tag in certain areas. Why it's stupid. The 560 SEC was already a stunning machine from Mercedes, representing the pinnacle of luxury in the late 80s. But when AMG, the performance arm of Mercedes-Benz, got their hands on it, they didn't just stop at making it faster. They went all out with an absurdly wide body, a hand-built AMG V8, and performance upgrades. In theory, this car should have been one of the most thrilling rides of its time, a true blend of luxury and performance. However, the 560 SEC and AMG widebody wasn't without its flaws, and the most glaring one was its transmission. For all the money you'd spend on this car, upwards of $200,000 in the late 80s, a sum equivalent to over $400,000 in today's money, you would expect something more than a 4-speed automatic transmission. Yes, despite the AMG badge, despite the widebody, and despite the incredible V8 engine, this high-end coupe still didn't offer the driving experience you might have expected from a car of this caliber. No manual transmission, just a 4-speed auto. For a car of this price and performance pedigree, that was a serious oversight. It felt like a missed opportunity to add the level of engagement that a driver would expect when spending that kind of money on a performance car. A manual would have allowed for more precise control over the car's power and a more engaging experience on the road, especially when you consider the fact that Mercedes and AMG had the expertise to deliver just that. Instead, you got a car that was incredibly luxurious and fast in a straight line, but somewhat lacking in terms of the raw, visceral connection that many enthusiasts crave. The wide body, while visually striking, also didn't necessarily improve the car's overall performance. It gave the 560 SEC a menacing presence on the road, but that exaggerated width came at the cost of agility. The car looked incredible, no doubt, but it didn't handle quite as sharply as one might expect from a car with such an aggressive stance. Add in the fact that this was the 80s, an era when performance cars were becoming more refined, and you start to question why they made the design choice to go so wide. It wasn't a car that you wanted to push to the limit on twisty roads. Instead, it was a car you wanted to cruise in, which seems counterproductive when you've got an AMG badge attached. Luxury factor. Despite its shortcomings in performance, the 560 SEC AMG widebody was undoubtedly one of the most opulent cars of its time. Mercedes-Benz, as expected, pulled out all the stops when it came to luxury. The interior was a showcase of the finest materials available, with leather everywhere, on the seats, the dashboard, the door panels, and even the steering wheel. It was the kind of interior that made you feel like royalty every time you climbed inside. But it wasn't just about the leather. The car also featured Recaro sports seats that were not only comfortable but also supportive, adding to the sense of occasion whenever you took a seat behind the wheel. The detailing was absolutely exquisite. You'd find gold-plated accents throughout the cabin, adding a touch of extravagance that took the car's luxury status to the next level. The idea of gold plating, while perhaps a bit over the top for some, was a sign of just how far Mercedes was willing to go to make sure the 560 SEC AMG widebody stood out from the crowd. It wasn't just luxury, it was excess, but in the most refined way possible. The car's interior felt like it was crafted not just for comfort, but to surround you with an experience that was as indulgent as it was sophisticated. Beyond the materials, the 560 SEC AMG was also one of the quietest, most refined cars you could drive. The V8 engine was smooth, producing an almost silky exhaust note that made long drives a serene experience. It was a car designed to cocoon you from the outside world, and when you were behind the wheel, you could almost forget you were driving a performance machine. The sheer quietness and smoothness of the ride made it an outstanding choice for cruising down the highway in absolute comfort. In summary, the 1989 Mercedes-Benz 560 SEC AMG widebody was an opulent, eye-catching car with a serious price tag, but it had more than its share of missteps. The absence of a manual transmission in a performance-oriented vehicle was a baffling oversight. And while the wide-body design looked fantastic, it compromised the car's agility and handling. The 1971 Monteverdi high-speed 375-4 is the kind of car that stands out not because it was universally beloved or sought after, but because of how peculiar and almost absurd it was in its design and execution. This Swiss-built luxury sedan, intended to compete with the finest automobiles in the world, took an unusual approach by blending Swiss craftsmanship with American muscle in a way that left enthusiasts and collectors scratching their heads. Why it's stupid. The concept behind the Monteverdi high-speed 375-4 was bold. A Swiss-made luxury sedan with a powerful American Mopar 7.2L V8 engine under the hood. On paper, this should have been a magnificent blend of European precision engineering and raw American power, but in reality, it didn't quite come together. While the 7.2L V8 engine certainly delivered impressive horsepower, the car itself was, for lack of a better word, a tank. It was heavier than a small house, and despite the powerful engine, the sheer mass of the car made it handle more like a lumbering beast than a sleek, high-performance luxury sedan. The weight of the Monteverdi 375-4 was its Achilles heel. Despite its impressive performance numbers, the car struggled with handling, making it a difficult and unwieldy vehicle to drive, especially when compared to other luxury sedans of the time. With its bulk, it could reach top speeds and accelerate well, but it lacked the finesse and agility of similarly priced cars, leaving it more of a straight-line performer than a car that could take on winding roads with grace and poise. Beyond the handling, the choice to use a Mopar V8 in a Swiss luxury sedan was strange. The engine was built for muscle cars, not for finely tuned luxury sedans, and while it delivered power, it didn't offer the smoothness or refinement that you might expect from a high-end European car. It felt like an odd, unrefined match, giving the Monteverdi a bit of a mismatched character. It was fast, but not in the way a luxury sedan should be. It was brash, loud, and demanding in a way that didn't quite mesh with the rest of the car's ultra-luxury ethos. Luxury factor. Despite its performance shortcomings, the Monteverdi 375-4 was undoubtedly luxurious in a way that only a high-end hand-built car could be. The interior was a showcase of opulence, with velvet seats that enveloped you in comfort and a leather-clad dashboard that made the cabin feel like a private, high-end lounge. Every detail was meticulously crafted, and you could feel the effort put into making the car feel special, even if it didn't quite deliver the driving experience that matched its luxury status. The cabin was trimmed with so much wood that it seemed like Monteverdi had raided an entire forest to furnish the interior. There was wood everywhere, on the dashboard, the door panels, even the gear shift. It was the kind of detailing that would make you think you had stepped into a luxurious 19th century library, with rich, dark woods giving the cabin a sense of traditional elegance. While some might have found the wood trim a bit excessive, it did contribute to the sense of luxury and refinement that the Monteverdi 375-4 was aiming for. It was an interior that would make any passenger feel as though they were part of a rarefied class, even if the car itself was a bit clumsy in execution. But despite all the luxurious materials and lavish details, there was still something inherently unrefined about the Monteverdi. The luxury was there in abundance, but it was paired with an odd, almost out-of-place American engine and a body that felt like it was built for a different era. One where performance wasn't as important as just making a bold, attention-grabbing statement. In summary, the 1971 Monteverdi high-speed 375-4 was a car that tried to fuse the best of Swiss craftsmanship with American power, but the result was something of a mismatch. It had the luxury and opulence that made it stand out, with plush velvet seats, a leather-clad dashboard, and an overwhelming amount of wood trim, but its heavy weight and poor handling left it more of a brute than a refined sedan. While it was undeniably fast, it lacked the finesse of its competitors, and its combination of luxury and power often felt more forced than seamless. It was a car that tried to have it all, but in the end, it was a bit too much of everything. Too much weight, too much power, and too much excess, resulting in a vehicle that didn't quite live up to its potential as a true high-speed luxury sedan. The 2003 Maybach 62 was a bold, ambitious attempt by Mercedes-Benz to revive the legendary Maybach brand, which had a history of producing luxury vehicles fit for royalty and heads of state. However, the end result was a car that felt more like a high-priced version of a stretched S-Class rather than a truly unique, exclusive luxury automobile. The 62 was designed to be the ultimate symbol of wealth and status, but in many ways it ended up feeling more like an oversized airport limo than a high-end luxury sedan. Why it's stupid? Mercedes-Benz took the logical route in terms of engineering with the Maybach 62, using the base platform of the S-Class and stretching it to create an ultra-luxury vehicle that could rival the likes of Rolls-Royce and Bentley. However, the decision to simply stretch an existing S-Class and add a V12 engine didn't really do justice to the Maybach name. While the S-Class was undoubtedly a great car, it wasn't exactly the epitome of automotive exclusivity. By simply elongating the body and slapping the Maybach badge on it, Mercedes seemed to miss the point of what made Maybach special in the first place. The result was a car that was undeniably powerful, with its twin turbocharged 5.5-liter V12 engine, but it had the unfortunate styling traits of a vehicle designed primarily for the chauffeur-driven crowd. Namely, a massive, unremarkable, and somewhat awkward body shape that screamed airport limo rather than world-class luxury sedan. The Maybach 62 lacked the elegance and distinctiveness of its rivals, often giving the impression of a more expensive version of a vehicle that could be seen shuttling executives and celebrities to and from events, rather than offering the kind of exclusivity and refinement that was expected from such an expensive car. The interior, while luxurious, also felt like it was designed to be more functional than engaging. It had all the high-end features you could want: ample rear legroom, reclining seats, and premium materials galore. But the overall experience didn't feel as immersive as you might expect from a car in this price range. It was a car built for being driven in, not driven by yourself, and that's where the disconnect lay. The Maybach 62 was a car for those who wanted to be chauffeured, not for those who enjoyed the art of driving. Luxury factor. Despite its flaws, the Maybach 62 was undeniably luxurious, and it certainly boasted a range of features designed to pamper and indulge its occupants. The rear seats, for example, were some of the most comfortable and opulent in the world. They could recline fully, offering a nearly bed-like level of comfort, making it the ideal car for those who preferred to relax in style while being driven around. For an extra touch of decadence, the car also came equipped with a champagne cooler, ensuring that you could enjoy a chilled bottle of your favorite bubbly while cruising in ultimate comfort. The cabin itself was a veritable palace of luxury, with every surface covered in the finest materials available. Leather seats, wood veneers, and polished metal accents were used in abundance to create a refined atmosphere that was fitting for a car of its price. In addition, the Maybach 62 featured all the high-tech gadgets and amenities you could ask for. Advanced entertainment systems, premium sound, and a host of features designed to keep you as comfortable and pampered as possible. But what made the Maybach 62 truly stand out were the details. Things like the bespoke seating arrangements, the lavish rear cabin features, and the fact that it was designed with the sole intention of making its rear passengers feel like royalty. The front cabin wasn't quite as spectacular, but it did offer a great driving experience thanks to its powerful V12 engine and smooth, effortless performance. However, if you were to buy a Maybach 62, it was clear you weren't looking to drive it yourself. Instead, it was the epitome of luxury for those who wanted to be driven in style, complete with all the amenities that make long journeys as comfortable as possible. Ultimately, the Maybach 62 was a car that had all the right ingredients for a luxury experience, but it was missing the uniqueness that would have made it a true icon. While it was packed with features like champagne coolers, reclining seats, and a level of craftsmanship that few other cars could match, its styling and concept felt a little too derivative and familiar. It was a car that was made for people who wanted the finest, most exclusive experience in the back seat, but it lacked the exclusivity, flair, and visual impact that would have made it stand out in the ultra-luxury market. In the end, the Maybach 62 was a luxury car that was undoubtedly impressive, but not the revolutionary vehicle that many had hoped for. It was a high-tech, high-luxury sedan with all the bells and whistles, but it felt like a stretched,